They say you can tell a person's true character by how they treat those who can't fight back. And on Flight 739 from Denver to Seattle, one arrogant man was about to learn that lesson at 30,000 feet. The morning rush at Gate C-12 was chaos. People shuffling, flight attendants calling boarding zones, overhead bins already crammed full. Among the crowd was Henry, a 72-year-old retired pilot, moving carefully with his small carry-on. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear but from age. Still, his eyes carried the calm of a man who had spent his life guiding planes through storms. But not everyone had that patience. Jason Miller, mid-30s, suit half-wrinkled, Bluetooth in his ear, barking orders to his assistant. The kind of man who thought priority boarding meant priority humanity. When Henry paused in the aisle to lift his bag into the overhead bin, Jason groaned dramatically. Unbelievable. Move it, old man. Gasps rippled through nearby rows. Henry flinched, the kind of flinch that comes from pride, not pain. "I'm sorry, son," he said quietly, his voice steady but tired. "Just give me a moment." Jason rolled his eyes and shoved past him, bumping Henry's shoulder hard enough to knock him slightly off balance. "Maybe next time, book a flight for people your age," he sneered. For a long second, no one said a word. A mother held her child a little closer. A college kid clenched his jaw. Even the attendants exchanged uneasy glances. But Henry just nodded, murmuring softly, "It's all right," as he took his seat, row 6, window side. No one, not even Jason, knew that this quiet, humble old man wasn't just another passenger. He was a retired Sky West captain, one of the most respected pilots in the company's history. And more importantly, the man sitting just behind the cockpit door, the one who would soon command the plane through takeoff and landing, was his son. And before the flight ended, Jason was going to find that out, in a way he'd never forget. The cabin lights glowed a soft amber as passengers shuffled down the narrow aisle of Flight 739, Denver to Seattle, the last flight of the night. Overhead bins slammed. Phones buzzed. A crying baby echoed somewhere in the back. It was the kind of flight where everyone just wanted to get home. Among the passengers was Walter Bennett, 78 years old, a man whose calm presence stood out in the chaos. His silver hair was neatly combed, his uniform jacket long retired, but his posture still sharp. He moved slowly, steadying himself with a worn oak cane that had seen more air bases, more dawn patrols than most men had ever dreamed of. He offered gentle smiles as he passed. "Pardon me, ma'am." "Sorry there, son." He even gave a polite nod to a flight attendant, who smiled back, recognizing the quiet dignity in his eyes. But not everyone was so patient. Just a few passengers behind him was Brad Thompson, mid-30s, in a tailored suit that screamed self-importance. He was the kind of man who checked his watch every 30 seconds and believed time itself worked for him. Phone in one hand, frustration in the other. He huffed loudly, making sure everyone around heard. "Come on, old man, pick up the pace." Walter pretended not to hear. Years in the Air Force had taught him when to engage and when to stay silent. When he finally reached his row, 14C, he set his cane aside and tried to lift his small carry-on into the overhead compartment. His hand shook slightly. The zipper caught on the armrest. He tugged once. Then again, the bag wouldn't budge. Behind him, Brad groaned dramatically, exhaling like it was a personal offense. "Oh my God, you got to be kidding me." The people around them shifted uncomfortably. A mother with her toddler looked away. A college student frowned, but said nothing. Walter tried to move aside. "Sorry, son. Just a second, I'll be out of your way." That's when it happened. Brad shoved forward with his shoulder, knocking Walter off balance. The old man stumbled, his cane clattering to the floor. Gasps filled the cabin. "Hey!" a passenger shouted from across the aisle. A flight attendant rushed over, her eyes wide. "Sir, are you okay?" Walter straightened slowly, gripping the back of his seat. His voice was calm, too calm. "I'm fine, dear. Just fine." But his hand trembled slightly as he picked up his cane. Brad muttered under his breath, "Maybe don't block the whole plane next time." The attendant turned sharply toward him. "Sir, there was no need for that." Brad just shrugged. Whatever. Let's just go. Passengers exchanged uneasy looks, whispers spreading like turbulence through the cabin. Walter sat down quietly, looking out the window, his reflection faint against the twilight. His eyes were patient, but behind them was something deeper. Not anger, not shame, just quiet disappointment. And while the rest of the cabin moved on, one person hadn't. Behind the cockpit door, through the small glass window, a pair of eyes had witnessed everything. The pilot hadn't stepped out yet, but he'd seen the shove, the look on his father's face, and the arrogance of the man who did it. And as his hand tightened on the cockpit handle, one thought crossed his mind. This flight just became personal. The engines thundered to life, vibrating softly through the cabin floor as Flight 739 taxied down the Denver runway. Seatbelts clicked. Cabin lights dimmed. The hum of the turbines filled the silence that had settled since the incident. Brad leaned back in his seat, tapping on his phone, still wearing that smug smirk. The kind people were when they think they've won. He'd already forgotten the old man he shoved aside. But not everyone had. A few rose up. A flight attendant, Maria, kept stealing glances toward the front. Her expression had shifted the moment she'd helped Walter settle into his seat. She'd seen the flash of something in the captain's eyes through the small cockpit window before takeoff, a look she couldn't quite read. Now, as the jet lifted into the dark sky, Maria adjusted her earpiece and murmured quietly into her headset. "Captain, we're all set in the cabin." A pause. Then a voice replied, calm but firm, "Copy that. How's row 14? Maria hesitated, lowering her tone. "He's fine, sir. Just shaken." The older gentleman. Another pause, longer this time. Then, "Keep an eye on him for me." She blinked. "For me?" The aircraft climbed through the clouds, city lights fading below. Passengers settled in, some watching movies, some already asleep. The fastened seatbelt sign blinked off with a soft chime. Brad signaled Maria with a lazy wave of his hand. "Hey, sweetheart, can I get a whiskey?" "Neat." Maria forced a polite smile. "Of course, sir." She turned to the service cart, her jaw tightening as she poured. Meanwhile, Walter sat quietly by the window, his hands clasped neatly on his lap. He wasn't angry, just thoughtful. His eyes followed the moonlight glinting off the wing. There was something poetic about it, like a reflection of all the nights he'd flown under that same silver glow. Maria returned and gently placed a drink on Brad's tray. "Here you go, sir." "Finally," Brad muttered, not even looking at her. As she moved past his row, she paused by Walter's seat and leaned down slightly. Her voice softened. "You okay, Mr. Bennett?" He looked up, eyes kind, smile faint but genuine. "I've been through worse turbulence." Maria couldn't help but smile back. "I believe that." A few nearby passengers, who had seen what happened earlier, smiled quietly, too. There was something about the man's calm that commanded respect without a word. What they didn't know was how true his words were, because this wasn't just a polite metaphor. Walter Bennett had once flown combat missions over hostile skies, guiding men half his age home through chaos and fire. He'd faced real turbulence, the kind that rattles souls, not just airframes. Now, sitting in seat 14C, he wasn't thinking about the shove. He was thinking about the irony, how people often forget that humility and honor don't wear badges or uniforms. Up front, Maria slipped behind the curtain, separating the cabin from the cockpit. She leaned toward the door and pressed the intercom button gently. "Captain Reynolds," she whispered. "He's fine. He said he's been through worse turbulence." There was silence for a moment, then a quiet chuckle came through the line. That sounded like him. Maria froze. "Sir," but the line went dead, replaced by the steady hum of the engines and the low murmur of passengers. She turned toward the cabin again, her eyes landing on Walter. Peaceful, unaware that just a few feet away, the man flying this plane wasn't just his pilot. He was his son, and the flight was far from over. The cabin lights brightened as the plane began its smooth descent to the soft gray clouds over Seattle. The air hummed with that familiar pre-landing tension. The shuffle of seatbelts, the closing of tray tables, the rustle of passengers preparing to return to their busy lives. Then came the voice. Deep calm, commanding, the kind of voice that carried both authority and warmth. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We'll be touching down in Seattle shortly. Weather's clear. Temperature's a cool 58 degrees. I want to personally thank you for flying with us today, and to remind you, kindness makes travel smoother for everyone. A few passengers smiled at the line. Brad didn't. He barely looked up from his phone. But Walter, seat 14C, window side, froze for just a heartbeat, a slow smile spreading across his wrinkled face. He knew that voice. He'd known it since the day it said its first word. As the wheels touched the runway, the plane rumbled to a stop, gentle and precise. Applause broke out, as it often does on good landings. Walter clapped quietly, proud. He could tell from the descent alone. His son had inherited his touch. The plane rolled toward the gate, the engines humming down. Overhead bins popped open, and that familiar post-flight chaos began. People stood too early, bags thumping down, phones lighting up as everyone tried to rush off first. And there was Brad, louder than everyone, already halfway into the aisle. Let's go, people. Some of us have connections to make. He swung his bag off the rack, nearly clipping the woman next to him. Sir, Maria, the flight attendant, said sharply, stepping in front of him, please remain seated until we park at the gate. Brad scoffed. Are you serious? We're stopped. Maria didn't move. Her eyes flicked briefly toward the cockpit door, just as it clicked open. The cabin fell into a hush. Out stepped the captain. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his uniform crisp, pilot's cap in hand. A few passengers straightened instinctively, as though his presence alone demanded respect. But it wasn't just authority he carried. It was something deeper. Quiet power. The kind that didn't need to be announced. His eyes scanned the cabin, sharp and knowing. Then they softened as they landed on seat 14C. He walked slowly down the aisle, each step echoing in the silent cabin. Every passenger's gaze followed him. When he reached Walter, his serious expression melted into something tender. Hey, Dad, he said warmly, his voice breaking the silence like sunlight through clouds. Walter smiled, eyes glistening. You did good up there, son. Gasps rippled through the cabin. Dad? Brad's head snapped around so fast it was almost comical. His face went from irritated pink to ghostly white in seconds. The captain crouched slightly beside Walter's seat. I heard there was some trouble during boarding. Walter chuckled softly, trying to brush it off. Nothing worth mentioning. But the captain's jaw tightened. He straightened slowly, turned to face Brad, who suddenly seemed very small in the narrow aisle. Sir, the captain said evenly, his tone controlled but razor-sharp, you push my father? Brad stammered, words tumbling out like broken glass. I didn't know he was your dad. He was in the way and... That's right, the captain interrupted, his voice steady, deliberate. You didn't know. He stepped closer. The air grew heavy, thick with the kind of silence that only comes before a lesson. But that's the thing about life, isn't it? You never know. You don't know who you're talking down to. You don't know what they've been through. And you don't know who's watching. Brad's lips parted, but no sound came out. Next time, the captain continued, you feel like shoving someone because you think you're more important, remember this moment. Because respect isn't about who deserves it. It's about who gives it. The words hung in the air like thunder after lightning. Walter reached out, gently tugging at his son's sleeve. It's okay, son. I've handled worse turbulence. The captain smiled faintly, his eyes softening again. I know you have, Dad, but that doesn't mean you should have to. He turned to Maria. Please, escort this passenger off, lass. Yes, Captain, she said, her voice firm but respectful. Passengers shifted, clearing the aisle as the captain helped his father to his feet. They walked side by side toward the exit, the retired pilot and the man who'd followed in his footsteps. As they stepped into the jet bridge, a murmur rippled through the cabin. Someone whispered, That's his dad. Another replied quietly, Man, I'll never look at people the same way again. Brad slumped into a seat red-faced, eyes fixed on the floor, replaying every arrogant word he'd said. And for the first time that day, he had nothing left to say. The terminal buzzed with its usual rhythm. Rolling suitcases, soft chatter, the distant crackle of intercoms announcing connecting flights. But amid all that motion, one quiet moment stood still. Walter Bennett and his son, Captain Ryan Bennett, walked side by side to the jet bridge, emerging into the fluorescent glow of the Seattle terminal. The old man moved with grace, cane tapping lightly against the tiled floor, while his son walked proudly beside him, his uniform immaculate, his captain's wings glinting under the lights. Passengers who'd witnessed the confrontation followed a few paces behind, whispering softly, eyes filled with something between admiration and guilt. "That's his dad," one man murmured. "Can you imagine?" said another. The story was already spreading like wildfire before they even reached baggage claim. Brad stood near the end of the gate, pale, shaken, humbled. He clutched his briefcase, avoiding eye contact with everyone who passed. The weight of his earlier arrogance pressed down on him heavier than any carry-on. For once, the man who thought he owned every room had nothing to say. Walter paused briefly, glancing back at the cabin door one last time. "You didn't have to make a scene back there, son," he said gently. His voice was calm, not scolding, just honest, the kind of voice that had guided Ryan through life. Ryan smiled faintly. "Maybe not," he admitted, "but some lessons hit harder when they come at 30,000 feet. Walter chuckled softly. "Still a dramatic one, I see." "Only when it counts," Ryan replied, giving his father's shoulder a light squeeze. As they walked toward the exit, a small voice piped up nearby. A little girl, no older than 7, tugged at her mother's sleeve and whispered loudly enough for a few people to hear. "Mommy, was that man really the pilot's dad?" Her mother smiled, watching the two men walk away. "Yes, sweetheart, and I think the pilot's very proud of him." The little girl tilted her head, eyes wide with wonder. "He must be a hero or something." Her mother nodded softly. "I think they both are." Just ahead, Walter slowed, taking the sight of his son, the boy he'd once taught to ride a bike, now commanding the skies. "You know," he said, "your mother would have loved to see you like this." Ryan's voice softened. "She already does, Dad." For a brief moment, the chaos of the airport faded away. No noise, no rush, just a father and son, bound by love, legacy, and a lifetime of lessons learned both on the ground and in the air. As they disappeared down the terminal, a few passengers lingered, still watching them go, each silently promising themselves they'd think twice before judging someone again. And somewhere behind them, Brad finally exhaled, eyes glistening. He whispered to no one in particular, "I've got some apologizing to do." He turned and walked away, slower this time, wiser, because sometimes the hardest turbulence doesn't come from the sky. It comes from within. They say karma has wings. And on this flight, she wore a captain's uniform. What happened that night became more than a story about a rude passenger and an old man. It became a reminder, whispered across terminals, replayed on phones, shared in quiet conversations by people who saw the video later. He thought he was pushing a helpless old man, just another face in the crowd. But what he really pushed was his luck, because the man he disrespected wasn't just anyone. He was the father of the very person flying the plane that carried him safely through the skies. In that moment, Brad learned a truth that hit harder than any turbulence. Respect costs nothing, but its absence can ground even the proudest man. The world is small, the sky even smaller. And sometimes, the same heavens you look down on are the ones that humble you from above. So the next time you feel impatient, the next time you think someone's slowing you down, remember Flight 739. Remember the quiet man with the cane, and the sun who soared above the clouds to remind the world that dignity, like flight, is something we all rise higher for when we give it freely. Because karma doesn't always come for you with fire and thunder. Sometimes she simply lands a plane and lets you see yourself from 30,000 feet up.